begin this morning by leading us all through an exercise. And it's a very simple one. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pair up with someone, or in twos or threes is fine. And I want you each to ask and answer the same question, right? The question is this: how are you doing? Right? Everyone say that question. How are you doing? All right, very, very simple. So ask your neighbour, and the neighbour asks back, and go. Okay. So now it's time for a little bit of feedback. So how many of you, because this is now time to dob your neighbour in, all right? So in the answers that you got, how many people said back to you, or how many people replied that they were good? Can I have a show of hands? Oh, a few, okay. Did anyone have an answer along the lines that they've been busy? Yeah, a few hands over there, a few hands up there. Yeah. Any other kind of out there replies that anyone kind of would like to give some feedback to?
Not too good, thanks.
Not too good. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Who said that actually things are not going well at the moment? A few hands. Yeah. Can I say that I'm encouraged by that? Because isn't it interesting that we all go into the whole, how are you doing? Oh, good. Or the other default answer is, how you been? Oh, I've been busy. Been real busy. Can everyone relate to what I'm saying? But sometimes, like, when was the last time you said, hey, how's it going? And someone said, oh man, I've been really bored, right? Or, yeah. Or how are you going? Oh, life is going terrible at the moment. Because our brains don't know what to do with that stuff sometimes, eh? Because actually, when we ask people, how are you doing, sometimes it can be more of a formality rather than actually an in-depth personal answer. So the reason I started with that was because I was working it out the other day. I'm coming up to the end of my 12th week here, and I've been making observations. And one of the observations that I've made is that in the last little while, I have met with a number of people who are either really tired or have levels of anxiety, people who are struggling with enough energy, some who have what I call a deep fatigue. And as I thought about this, I thought, well, actually, this is where we now need to move to in our teaching, right? So for some of you in the room who may have been looking for a sign, here's some signs that hopefully might be helpful for you. Kind of subtle, yeah? You're getting the hint? Yeah? Look, this is also an area that's close to my heart. Some of you will know that Jules and I co-authored a book talking about this very thing. And so for the next 3 weeks, I am going to be hassling you about rest. In the series Push Pause, Slowing Down to Be with God, we are going to unpack what God's plan for rest is. And I think that this is especially important because you and I are part of an activist movement, right? This week I went to a community meeting where I was bombarded by people going, hey, great to see the Salvation Army here. We love what you do. That's the default thing that the Army's known for. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, by the way. I think it's kind of cool when you go there and people, they recognise those things. But I'm not saying that the stuff we do isn't important. Don't mishear me, because it's really important. But to our shame, as the Salvation Army, we have a horrendous record of burning people out. Everyone's going, yeah, right? If we're the army that brings life, then we shouldn't be burning people out. And I think we're learning. I think we're getting better. But I think we've got a long way to go. And I say that out of all love and respect. In addition to this, have you noticed that being a workaholic is socially acceptable? And in fact, as I was thinking about this week, if you think about it, this is the one commandment that we not only break, but we often brag about breaking. We break the commandment to rest. Now, I don't know about you, but not many people I know this week have skited about how many lies they've told, or about how much stuff they've stolen, or how many people they murdered last week. No, we don't skite about that stuff, but yet we will often incorporate into our language this whole idea of being busy, and wear it as a badge of honour. Now, there's this underlying thing with busyness, is that when we say that we are busy, what we are trying to say, I believe, is that we matter, that we are contributing. I think there's an underlying thing that our value, we believe, is often seen in what we do. And as I said before, when was the last time someone told you when you said, how's it going? They said, I've been really bored. So I just want to remind us first and foremost this morning, friends, that we are not human doings. First and foremost, we are human beings. But our society reinforces this idea that if you're not busy, then you don't have value. I found this very cool quote by a guy called John Ortberg. Some of you will know who he is in this room. But he wrote that, he said, busyness is not just a disordered schedule, but it is also a disordered heart. I came across, I had this wonderful week of rabbit holes, meaning I found all of this information this week. Read all sorts of studies about some statistics about how Kiwis are really bad at resting, even though we have a she'll be right attitude. One of the studies I found actually was around cell phone use amongst young people here in New Zealand. Now, the study was done over a 4-year period, and it was done with kids who were aged between 9 and 13. And it found that the average young person uses their phone about 4 hours per day on average. And what they're saying is this does not allow for their brains to rest. Now, the current thinking is that if this use continues at the reported rate, then unlike any generation before them, they have an increased risk of numerous types of brain tumours by their early 30s. Isn't that interesting? And this study was done by the Interphone and Hardell group. Another study I found showed that 75% of us here in New Zealand sleep by our phone. And 90% of those who do check it first thing in the morning. Now, I can be guilty of that. And that's because my alarm, I use my phone as my alarm, right? But I find it interesting that our supposed labour-saving devices, such as phones, emails and computers, means now that we carry our jobs around with us for 7 days a week. So we've kind of got that dynamic that goes on for a lot of households now. The danger about having your phone as your alarm is I find sometimes I pick it up, turn the alarm off, and then I go, oh, I've got a message. And so straight away in getting out of bed, my brain is already, it's jumped ahead of probably where it should have been in terms of its activity. Now, on top of things like this, Wellington has a lot of things to do as a city. And so what happens to so many of us, I've noticed, is that we speed up our lives to a quicker pace than what we are designed for. We're constantly skipping from one thing to the next. Can you put your hand up if you can relate to that? Yeah. Now, I believe And as I've been reflecting on this, and as I've been talking with people, I think this kind of busyness, doing it consistently and continuously, does something to our soul. And I think a deep weariness begins to enter our inner person. My mum used to have a quote from Corrie ten Boom, for those of you that know who she was, amazing lady, on our fridge at home, and it was this when I was growing up: if the devil can't make us bad, he will make us busy. And there's so much truth in that as I've reflected on that this week, because they both have the exact same effect. Both busyness and sin cut us off to the connection of the awareness of the Spirit of God and the life that He has planned for you. And this is why proactive rest of doing it God's way is important for all of us. So, over the next 3 weeks, we're going to lay out what I call a biblical theology of Sabbath rest. A biblical framework, actually. Those are big words. You don't have to worry about what they mean. It just means we're going to pull some stuff out of the text. But we're going to make some observations from the Bible that will hopefully help us all re-examine this important topic of rest. And so, this morning, we're going to start at the beginning. So the passages that Fiona read, I'd just like to reread those. So if we could turn in our Bibles to Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 1, and then dropping down to verse 31, and then into the beginning of chapter 2. So Genesis 1, verse 1, and I'm reading from the NIV. Verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now I'm using that as a summary statement for all of Genesis 1, right? And then we go down to verse 31. God saw all that He had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Then into chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day God had finished the work He had been doing. So on the seventh day He rested, or He Sabbathed in the Hebrew. He rested from all His work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it He rested from all the work of creating He had done. Now notice in this account, and I just want to say these words over all of us: God rested. You know, some of us can be guilty of saying, I don't have time to rest. God rested. The word rested is Shavuot in the Hebrew. And it's where we get the word Sabbath from. And it literally means just to stop. God did not have to rest. But the idea here is that God wasn't tired or burnt out. The idea was that the rest that He demonstrated was something that was enjoyable. We often go, I don't have time to rest. Actually, it should be something that we look forward to. In fact, I made an interesting discovery this week. The word Shavuot in the Hebrew can also be translated delight. Isn't that cool? The rabbis point out that there is an odd use of language in the text. So it's odd in the fact that they point out that God didn't just rest, but that He created rest. In His act of resting, He created rest. Or to put it another way, where did rest come from? It came from God because He created it. Now, the Jewish teachers go on to point out that this kind of rest that He created is actually something like a good, clean, wholesome party. Doesn't that put a different spin on things? It's something like a joyful, peaceful celebration. So that is what the Sabbath is. It's a whole day set aside to follow God's example, to stop and to delight in the world and your life and place in it. And above all, to take delight in God himself. It is an invitation to enter the light. And in fact, it should be the thing that we look forward to all week. Another question for us all to ponder is this: what could I do for 24 hours that would bring me rest and deep joy? What could I do for 24 hours that would bring me rest and deep joy? What could I do that would make me look at all of creation and think about and enjoy God's presence? What could I do that would ultimately make me look at these things and go, it is good? Now, that is why on Mondays you will not be able to get hold of me unless someone's died, of course. That's right. But more often than not, I will be out in nature and creation. Recently, and some of you guys will laugh, I've been losing discs, which are equivalent to golf balls, down in a particular gully on the Berrinpoor golf course. That's become my habit on Monday mornings. But in the midst of doing that, actually just literally lying under a tree and thanking God for his goodness, that's what refills my soul. So my phone is left in the car, my laptop is away in its bag. I think ideally, and I know that we all live in a society that has split a lot of us off from other family members, but I think Sabbath should be something that is about close friends. It should be about family. I also believe it should be about good food. Our Jewish friends lead the way in that. Man, they can eat. Right? There's something about the Sabbath that is all based around food. If I was living in the same town as my grandkids, I'd be there all the time. But also, in addition to that, it means no strings attached time with God. Doing it because it's something that I love, and a weekly celebration of all that is good and true and beautiful for me. Now, I want us to notice three things from the text as we start to develop our biblical framework for rest. Now, first of all, this is kind of obvious, but notice that God worked for 6 days and then he rested. And in doing so, he built a rhythm into the fabric of creation. By the way, it's no coincidence that every single ancient society in the world had a 7-day calendar. Like that's a really weird thing when you get your head around it. Rabbit holes, we won't go down there. Something else I learnt this week, and I didn't know this, but in the French Revolution, around the time of Napoleon and that, they attempted to adjust the calendar. I don't know if you knew this, but they tried to introduce a 10-day calendar. And the idea was that things weren't going well in the country, they wanted to up production, so let's extend people's working time and the whole thing. It failed miserably. Suicide went through the roof, happiness was a disaster, and productivity actually went down. I never knew that until this week. Now, building on this idea, one of Jules and our favourite teachers, a guy by the name of John Mark Comer. Have you guys heard of him? He has written this book called The Relentless Pursuit of... No, that's right, I've got that wrong. Hold on, I've written it down here. Oh yeah, The Relentless Elimination of Hurry. Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, sorry. Oh my goodness, I get it right. I actually went to try and buy some of those books this week for our library, but when I was talking with the suppliers here, as soon as those books came in, they said they've never sold books as quickly as they have. I got there too late. When I left the office to go to the shop, they had 34 in stock. And by the time I got there 2.5 hours later, all 34 were gone. Right? It's a really good book, but you can get it on Kindle and things like that. So if you want some companion reading to what we're talking about, that is a very, very good resource. And I know some of us have already read it. So John Mark Comer, he says this. He said, there have been studies to show productivity virtually drops off around the 50-hour mark in any given week, which is interestingly about 6 days of work. Right? He says that we live in a world without rhythm. Our world conspires against us to go and never stop. But you are not a machine. You have a soul. You are not made to run 24/7. You are made to tap into the rhythm that is embedded in creation. It is a law in the fabric of the universe. There is a law of work and a law of rest. The two must be held in balance. Our culture subliminally tells us that action is better than rest. Doing anything is better than doing nothing. Sabbath is like a compass point that keeps us on track. When we don't Sabbath, we go against the rhythm that God himself built into your body and into the world around you. He also points out this amazing thing of a study that was done in the United States. He assures it's very reputable. And it was a study of Seventh-day Adventists in America. Now, for those of you that don't know what the Seventh-day Adventist church is, we wouldn't agree with a lot of their teaching, but one of the things they do is they embed their cycle around the Jewish Sabbath. All right, so they have church on Saturdays, and they have a whole rhythm around that. But interestingly, this study has found out that on average they live 11 years longer than the average person in America. Isn't that interesting? And one doctor in the study pointed out that if you count up the time devoted to Sabbath of the average lifespan of an American, it would be 11 years. So his hypothesis was, for every day you Sabbath, you literally get that day added back in that line of thinking. Now, what we do with that, I don't know, but I find it very interesting. What I want to briefly talk about is what happens when we don't practice Sabbath. When we go against the grain of the universe, we suffer the consequences: burnout, anxiety, poor mental health, high blood pressure, a lousy immune system, being sick all the time, alongside a deep sense of being disconnected from God. Often when we're busy too, I think it can lead to shallow relationships. Another one of my favourite teachers says that you can't fight the Sabbath rhythm any more than you can fight gravity. It just is. So what I take from this is, if we fight Sabbath, my hunch is that sickness becomes our Sabbath, our forced rest. We were designed to rest. So friends, Sabbath is coming for us all. But what kind of Sabbath will you choose? Will it be a Sabbath of delight or a Sabbath of brokenness? Whether you welcome it or fight it, like gravity, it just is. So that's the first thing. God created for 6 days, and then on the seventh day he rested. The second thing to notice in the text is that God blessed the Sabbath. Now for a geeky moment. In Genesis 1, we see that God blesses 3 things. He blesses the animals, and you can go back through the Genesis 1 text, but specifically he blesses the fish and the birds. He then blesses people, and then he blesses the Sabbath. Now, with the first two, with animals and people, the blessing is the ability to procreate, right? So what does he say to the animals? He says, be fruitful and multiply. Then what does he say to humans? He says, be fruitful and multiply. And then the third blessing that happens is he blesses the Sabbath. And I want you to think about that, right? He says to animals, go forth and multiply. He then says to people, go forth and multiply. And then he blesses a day. What does it mean? It means that, like the other blessings, the Sabbath has a life-giving ability to fill your soul and set your world up with more life. And it's this idea that keeping the Sabbath multiplies life. Now, as I've already pointed out, life is tiring. Am I right? Mate, I think about this week. I've had a crazy week this week. And I have to say that this has probably been for me one of the most stressful weeks, just with busyness and craziness and what's gone on. In addition to that, I've had some horrendous dreams during the night. And it's all been about busyness. I can't explain it any further than that without spending half an hour, so I'm not going to do that. But waking up each morning, Friday morning, Saturday morning, and then this morning, just been like, oh my goodness, what was that? And so I'm convinced that we're on the right track, right? I think that this morning I was woken up slightly startled because of some of the things that I had dreamed. But basically the dream was about the chaos in people's lives because of disconnection from God and being crazy busy. So we're on the right track. But I don't know about you, You get to the end of the week and whatever your week cycle is like. But I don't know about you, but I'm stuffed, right? My self-discipline is down. My motivation can be at an all-time low. But my proactive rest refills and resets this. It helps me rediscover creativity. It helps me rediscover vision. And it gives me energy back. It gives me hope. It gives me optimism. It gives me peace, joy. The fruit of the Spirit are easier to discern in my life. And it gives me clarity. So the Sabbath day, or the Sabbath principle, is more than just a day. It is a blessed day. So, in our framework, God creates in 6 days and then he rests on the seventh. He then blesses the seventh day. But the final thing that I just want to unpack this morning is this. The third thing to note is that God blessed the seventh day, and then what did he make it? He made it holy. So, this is very cool. Time for another geeky moment. In the Bible, Jewish teachers and some Christian theologians talk about this principle of first mention. So the idea is, by the way, there's a lot of debate. If you go into Google, principle, first mention, there's going to be lots of, everything from this is the most wonderful thing through to this is no evil, right? And so there's a lot of debate about whether it's a valid principle or not. But I think in this case, it is. But the basic idea is that the first time you read a word or a subject in Scripture, it is essentially a definition. Now, it is in this point in the text that the use of the word holy, it's the first time it turns up in the Bible. And when we read it, what is it that God makes holy? It is a day, right? It's not a physical object, but it is time, a period of time. Now, you and I, we're not living in the ancient world, but for the original readers, this would have leapt off the page and would have been highly controversial if you weren't an Israelite. And why is that? Because in the ancient world, the gods and goddesses were found always in physical space. You either had to go to a mountain, you had to go to a temple, you had to go to a shrine or a ziggurat, all these sorts of things. And in most cases, the higher you were up physically, the closer to heaven you were, and therefore closer to the gods you were. So the difference between all the religious systems and the book of Genesis is that the seventh day is not physical architecture. It is architecture in time. And that's what separates the God of the Scriptures, God with the big G, from all the gods with the little g's. The entire cosmos, the entire creation is his temple. We can't shrink God down to us, right? But the cool thing, that means if you want to experience God, you don't need to go on a pilgrimage to the other side of the world or to some far off country. All you need to do is stop. He is found right here, right now, in time specifically. You don't need to enter into a cathedral, even though I have to say going to St. Paul's is a very, very cool experience. But rather all we need to do is enter into a day that is blessed and holy. And because it is a day, and because it is time, it means God is accessible to everyone anywhere who chooses to seek him. So I'm going to ask the music team to come forward. But this morning, if you were looking for a sign, here's some. And I say that with all sincerity. Maybe it is time for some of us to think about reducing speed, slowing down, taking time to stop and immerse ourselves in the idea of Sabbath. Because, friends, Sabbath is coming whether we like it or not. So this morning, I'd like us to ask ourselves, do I have a rhythm of Sabbath rest included in my life rhythm? And for each of us, by the way, it will look slightly different depending on our work and our life schedules. So I'm not saying, hear me now, I'm not saying we're not being legalistic that it must be Saturday, right? It must be sundown Friday to I'm not saying that at all. Jesus Christ is our rest. And we're going to unpack that a little bit further as we go on. But if you're tired and weary this morning and you don't have this practice in place, then I would love for you to seriously consider doing so. Some of you may have worked out that I'm on a little bit of a sneaky campaign here. The very first thing that I introduced to us all when I came into the space was that 2024 would be the year of the Word. And you remember how we took those rocks home, right? So now, in your thinking, I want you to add to that and go, have I been in the Word today? And have I had a period of rest this week? We're going to start to build up a whole series of things that will help us in our spiritual formation.